The year is 1437, and darkness has swallowed another German village. In a timber-framed house where cold seeps through every crack between the beams, a peasant named Heinrich suddenly finds himself awake. His eyes snap open to complete blackness, but something is terribly wrong. He cannot move a single muscle in his body despite being fully conscious and aware. A crushing weight presses down upon his chest, making each breath a desperate struggle. It feels as though an invisible force is slowly squeezing the life from his lungs. His heart pounds wildly against his ribs, but his limbs remain frozen as if turned to stone. He tries to scream for his wife sleeping beside him, but no sound escapes his paralyzed throat. Then he sees it in the corner of the room. A shadow darker than the surrounding darkness takes shape near the wooden door. Is it a woman with long, tangled hair, or perhaps some kind of animal crouching on all fours? The figure moves closer, and Heinrich feels its presence settling upon his chest, adding to the suffocating weight that threatens to crush him completely. The thing sits there for what feels like hours, though it may only be minutes. It feeds on his terror and drinks his breath while he lies helpless beneath its invisible form. Just before dawn breaks through the shuttered windows, the presence finally lifts. Heinrich gasps for air as control returns to his body, and he bolts upright, trembling and drenched in cold sweat. At first light, he stumbles to his neighbors and describes the horrifying experience. They nod knowingly and speak a single word that chills him more than the night terror itself. Mare. The nightmare has ridden him like a horse through the darkness. This was no isolated incident in medieval Europe. From the frozen fjords of Scandinavia to the misty forests of Slavic lands, millions experienced this same nocturnal horror. They called it by different names in different tongues, but the terror remained universal. Who or what were these demons that came in the night to steal breath from sleeping victims? Why did every culture in Europe develop almost identical beliefs about these suffocating spirits? Tonight, we descend into the darkest corners of European folklore to meet the nightmare demons, Mare, Alp, and Mora, who have haunted humanity for over 1,000 years. If you're ready to look beyond the veil of forgotten myths and uncover the secrets the world chose to forget, subscribe to Inside Strange Times so you won't miss new journeys into the realm of ancient mysteries. The word nightmare that we use so casually today carries within it the memory of an ancient terror. In Old English, the compound word was spelled nitmare, where nit meant night and mare referred to a female demon that rode sleeping people like horses. This linguistic fossil preserves a belief that dominated Germanic and Scandinavian consciousness for over a millennium. The etymology traces back to the Proto-Germanic word maren, meaning to crush or press down. In Old High German, she was called Mara, while the Old Norse knew her as Mara as well. The Anglo-Saxons feared the mare, and even Chaucer wrote of the mare in his Canterbury Tales. But this was no mere linguistic curiosity for medieval Europeans. This was a real entity that haunted their nights. The mare appeared in various physical forms depending on the region and the witness. Most commonly, she manifested as a woman with long, tangled hair that seemed to float around her pale face. In some German villages, witnesses described her as a hideous crone with yellowed teeth and claw-like fingers. Yet, in Scandinavian accounts, she could appear as a beautiful young maiden whose beauty masked her deadly intent until it was too late. The transformation abilities of the mare extended beyond human forms. Countless testimonies from medieval chronicles describe her shifting into a black horse that would gallop through the night. In Bavaria, peasants swore they saw her take the shape of a massive black dog with glowing red eyes. Some accounts from 13th century Sweden mention her appearing as a white butterfly that would flutter through keyholes to reach her victims. The behavior of the mare followed a consistent pattern across all Germanic territories. She would enter homes through the smallest openings, including keyholes, cracks in walls, or gaps beneath doors. Once inside, she would locate her sleeping victim and position herself directly upon their chest. The weight would start gradually, but increase throughout the night, pressing down harder until the victim could barely draw breath. A manuscript from 14th century Cologne describes the mare's attack in vivid detail. The chronicler writes that she would sit cross-legged upon the chest of her victim, her weight growing heavier with each passing moment, like stones being piled upon the sleeper. The victim would be fully aware, but completely paralyzed, unable to move or cry out for help. She would remain there feeding on their life force until the first cock crow announced the coming dawn. Physical evidence of mare attacks was taken very seriously by medieval communities. Victims would wake with mysterious bruises on their chests that resembled hoof prints or claw marks. Their hair would be found twisted into impossible knots that no human hand could have tied during sleep. These elf locks, as they were called in England, served as proof that the mare had been riding the victim through the night. Horses in the stable were not safe from the mare's nocturnal visits either. Farmers would find their horses exhausted in the morning with their manes braided into elaborate patterns. The animals would be covered in sweat, as if they had been ridden hard all night long. In Germanic folklore, this was because the mare literally rode the horses, using them to travel between victims or simply tormenting them for her own dark pleasure. The question of who became a mare occupied medieval theologians and common folk alike. The most widely accepted belief held that certain women were born with a dual nature. By day, they lived as ordinary members of the community, but at night, their spirit would leave their sleeping body to terrorize others. These women often had no knowledge of their nocturnal activities and would wake exhausted from their spiritual journeys. Several signs marked a potential mare from birth according to Germanic tradition. A girl born with a caul or membrane covering her face was almost certainly destined to become a mare. The caul was preserved and hidden because destroying it was believed to release the mare's spirit permanently. Children born with teeth already visible, or those who walked backward before forward, were also suspected of harboring the mare nature. In Scandinavian sagas, the mare appears as a recurring supernatural threat. The Ynglinga saga mentions King Vanlandi of Sweden, who was killed by a mare sent by a Finnish sorceress. The creature trampled him to death in his sleep as payment for his broken promise to the sorceress. The Eyrbygja saga describes how a mare tormented the household of Thorod, riding both the people and livestock until protective measures were taken. The connection between the mare and the Valkyries reveals ancient roots of this belief. Some scholars of medieval texts noted that Valkyries were originally called Mara or dream women in the oldest sources. These warrior maidens who chose the slain for Valhalla may have evolved from earlier beliefs about female spirits who visited men in their sleep. The 13th century Icelandic historian Snorri Sturluson hints at this connection, though Christian influence had already begun sanitizing these pagan associations. Medieval German chronicles provide numerous documented cases of Mare attacks. A manuscript from Augsburg dated 1423 describes the case of Anna Steinerin. She was accused by multiple neighbors of being a mare after several villagers reported being ridden at night following arguments with her during the day. The victims testified that they recognized her face hovering above them during the attacks, though Anna swore she never left her bed. The witch trials of the 16th and 17th centuries frequently included mare accusations. In the Würzburg witch trials of 1629, several women confessed under torture to sending their spirits out at night to sit upon their enemies. They described leaving their bodies through their mouths as a white mist, then entering victims' homes through keyholes to torment them until dawn. These confessions were considered legitimate evidence and led to numerous executions. A particularly detailed account comes from the trial records of Dorothea Hindramstein in 1662. She was accused of being a mare after her neighbor Hans Becker experienced repeated night attacks. Becker testified that he saw Dorothea's face clearly during the paralysis, and that she whispered threats about his unpaid debts to her husband. The court records note that Dorothea had distinctive red hair, which several victims claimed to have seen spread across their chests during attacks. The mare also appeared in medieval medical texts, though physicians struggled to explain her. The German physician Johann Weyer wrote in 1563 about patients who claimed to be ridden by the mare every night until they were near death from exhaustion. He noted the consistent symptoms across all cases, including chest pressure, paralysis, and vivid hallucinations, but could offer no natural explanation that satisfied his patients. While the mare terrorized Germanic peoples as a female spirit, the Germans and Austrians knew another nightmare demon with even more disturbing characteristics. The Alp, whose name derives from the same root as elf, represented a more complex and sexually charged variation of the night terror. Unlike the exclusively female mare, the Alp could manifest as either male or female, making it an even more unpredictable threat to medieval sleepers. The etymology of Alp reveals its ancient origins in pre-Christian Germanic beliefs about nature spirits. The word connects to the Proto-Germanic word albaz, meaning white or supernatural being. In Old High German Alb referred to supernatural beings that could be helpful or harmful. By the medieval period, the term had evolved to specifically denote the malevolent spirits that attacked people in their sleep. The dual nature of the Alp set it apart from other nightmare demons in European folklore. During daylight hours, the Alp lived as an ordinary human being, walking among neighbors and family. But when night fell, this person's spirit would separate from their sleeping body, transforming into a demonic entity driven to torment others. The human host often remained unaware of their nocturnal activities, waking exhausted, but with no memory of their spirit's dark adventures. The most distinctive feature of the Alp was its magical cap known as the Tarncap. This hat of invisibility granted the Alp its powers and allowed it to enter homes unseen. Medieval texts describe the Tarncap as a soft cap, sometimes red, sometimes white, that could shrink the wearer to the size of an insect. If someone could steal an Alp's Tarncap while it was attacking, they could control the demon and force it to reveal its human identity. According to South German folklore, several circumstances could cause someone to become an Alp. The most common was being born with a caul, which marked the child for this dual existence. If a pregnant woman allowed a horse's harness to touch her belly, her child would become an Alp who rode people like horses. Eating rabbit or hare meat during pregnancy was another sure way to curse one's child with the Alp nature, according to Bavarian beliefs. Children born with eyebrows that met in the middle were immediately suspected of being Alps. Those born with teeth already visible or with excessive body hair faced similar suspicion. In some regions, the seventh son of a seventh son was destined to become an Alp, regardless of any preventive measures the family might take. The curse was considered hereditary, passing from parent to child through generations. The Alp's behavior combined elements of the Mare with more disturbing sexual components. Like the Mare, it would sit upon the chest of sleeping victims, causing paralysis and suffocation. But the Alp went further, drinking blood from the nipples of men and women alike. Male Alps particularly targeted women, causing erotic dreams and nocturnal emissions that left victims exhausted and ashamed in the morning. Medieval chroniclers documented the Alps' disturbing feeding habits in graphic detail. The creature would suck milk from the breasts of nursing mothers, leaving their infants to starve. It would also drain milk directly from cows in the barn, causing them to go dry and leaving bloody marks on their udders. Some accounts describe the Alp forcing sleeping victims to eat repulsive things like horse manure or their own hair while paralyzed and unable to resist. The sexual nature of Alp attacks linked them to beliefs about incubi and succubi. A 15th century manuscript from Munich describes cases where women claimed to have been impregnated by Alps who visited them repeatedly in the night. These demon lovers would appear as handsome men or beautiful women, seducing their victims in dreams that felt completely real. The offspring of such unions were said to be marked as Alps themselves, continuing the curse through supernatural reproduction. The transformation abilities of the Alp exceeded even those attributed to the Mare. Beyond the common forms of cat, bird, and butterfly, the Alp could become a white moth that would flutter around the face of its intended victim. In Austrian folklore, it might appear as a small white mouse that would enter through the victim's mouth. The Alp could transform into a snake that would coil around the sleeper's neck, or a boar that would gore them with invisible tusks. A particularly detailed transformation account comes from a 1721 trial in Württemberg. Multiple witnesses testified that they saw their neighbor transform into a large white dog. The animal entered the bedroom of a young woman named Marguerite the Burer, who then experienced the classic symptoms of an Alp attack. She reported feeling the dog's weight upon her chest, though when she could finally move, no animal was present in the locked room. The medical term Alpdrücken entered German medical vocabulary in the 17th century. This word, literally meaning Alp pressure, described the specific sensation of chest compression during night terrors. Physicians noted that patients experiencing Alpdrucken showed consistent symptoms, including rapid heartbeat, profuse sweating, and temporary paralysis upon waking. The term remained in medical use well into the 19th century, showing how deeply these folkloric beliefs influenced German medical thought. Southern German variations of the Alp displayed unique regional characteristics. In Bavaria, the Alp was called the Drude and was always female in nature. The Drude would braid the manes of horses into elaborate patterns called Drudenzopfe that were considered cursed and had to be cut off immediately. Austrian folklore spoke of the Schredele, a diminutive form of Alp that specialized in tormenting children and causing nightmares about falling. The Swiss had their own protective symbol against the Alp, known as the Drudenfuss. This pentagram symbol was carved into bedroom furniture and painted above doorways. The 5 points of the star were said to confuse the Alp, forcing it to count each point repeatedly until dawn arrived. Medieval Swiss houses often featured elaborate Drudenfuss carvings on cradles and bed frames as permanent protection against these night demons. The connection between Alps and the Nachtseher adds another layer to German nightmare folklore. Some regions believed that Alps who died would become Nachtseher, or night wasters. These undead beings would devour their own burial shrouds and flesh in the grave, while simultaneously draining life force from their living relatives. This belief created a double terror where the Alp threatened both sleep and death. Martin Luther himself wrote about encounters with Alps and similar night demons. In his table talks, he describes being attacked by an Alp while staying at Wartburg Castle. He claimed the demon sat upon his chest and tried to strangle him, but he drove it away by invoking the name of Christ. Luther interpreted these attacks as attempts by the devil to prevent him from translating the Bible into German. Historical records from Alp trials reveal the deadly seriousness of these accusations. In 1586, a woman named Ursula Goetz was executed in Ellwangen after being convicted of sending her Alp spirit to torment the mayor's family. The trial records describe how she supposedly confessed to learning the art from her grandmother, who taught her to leave her body through meditation. She claimed she could transform into various animals to enter locked houses and would ride her victims until they begged for mercy. The Alp appears in numerous German folk tales collected by the Brothers Grimm and others. These stories often feature heroes who capture an Alp's Tarnkap and use it to gain wealth or power. In one tale, a clever farmer traps an Alp in a bottle by tricking it into shrinking down to enter through the neck. The trapped Alp must grant wishes in exchange for freedom, showing how folklore transformed terror into opportunity for the clever and brave. The persistence of Alp beliefs into the modern era demonstrates their deep cultural roots. Even in the 19th century, German newspapers reported cases of suspected Alp attacks. Rural communities continued traditional protections against Alps well into the 20th century, particularly in isolated alpine valleys where old beliefs died slowly. The terror of the Alp had embedded itself so deeply in the German psyche that it survived the Enlightenment, industrialization, and even 2 world wars. While Germanic peoples feared the Mare and Alp, the Slavic world knew its own version of the nightmare demon. The Mora, whose name derives from the Old Slavic root mor, meaning death or nightmare, haunted the nights from Poland to the Balkans with remarkable consistency. This female demon shared many characteristics with her Germanic cousins, yet possessed uniquely Slavic traits that reflected the cultural fears of Eastern Europe. The etymology of Mora reveals deep connections to death and pestilence in Slavic consciousness. The root mor appears in numerous Slavic words related to death, including the Russian mor, meaning plague. In Polish, she was called zmora, with the prefix z, intensifying the connection to death and exhaustion. Serbian and Croatian folklore knew her simply as Mora, while Czech and Slovak traditions called her Mura with slight phonetic variation. Regional naming variations across Slavic lands reflected local beliefs about the creature's nature. In Slovenia, she was known as Mora, but also as Vedomka, meaning the knowing one. Bulgarian folklore called her Morawa, or sometimes Talisam, when she appeared in animal form. The Sorbs of Eastern Germany preserved the name Murawa, showing linguistic connections across the Slavic diaspora. Each name carried specific connotations about how that culture understood the demon's origins, powers, and weaknesses. The physical appearance of the Mora varied between her active and passive states. During daylight hours, she appeared as an ordinary woman, often described as beautiful, with long, dark hair and pale skin that seemed to glow in moonlight. Witnesses who claimed to see the Mora during attacks described her differently, as a hideous crone with burning eyes and hair that moved like living snakes. This duality reflected the Slavic belief that beauty could mask terrible evil. The transformation between human and demon form followed specific patterns in Slavic folklore. The Mora's soul would slip from her sleeping body through her mouth as a bluish flame or wisp of smoke. This ethereal form could then reshape itself into various animals or remain invisible. The body left behind would sleep so deeply that nothing could wake it, appearing almost dead until the soul returned before dawn. Polish folklore provided extensive details about how women became Moras against their will. A girl born with teeth already visible would inevitably develop the Mora nature at puberty. Those born with two hearts or two souls, as some regions described it, carried the curse from their first breath. If a pregnant woman walked under a horse's rope or looked at fire through a keyhole, her daughter would become a Mora, regardless of any protective measures taken. The involuntary nature of the Mora curse distinguished Slavic beliefs from Germanic traditions. Most Moras had no control over their nocturnal activities and suffered greatly from the curse. They would wake exhausted every morning, with no memory of their soul's dark journeys. Some Polish accounts describe Moras who discovered their nature and tried desperately to chain themselves to their beds or have family members guard them through the night. Serbian and Croatian traditions identified specific signs that marked a living Mora. Women with eyebrows that grew together above the nose were immediately suspect. Those born on certain days, particularly Saturday or during specific lunar phases, carried increased risk of the Mora curse. A woman whose shadow appeared distorted or who cast no shadow at certain times was almost certainly a Mora, according to Balkan folklore. The behavior of the Mora followed consistent patterns across all Slavic territories. She would enter homes through keyholes, chimneys, or any small opening left unprotected. Unlike the Germanic Mare, who simply sat upon victims, the Mora was said to wrap herself around the sleeper's throat like an invisible serpent. She would squeeze, gradually increasing pressure until the victim could barely breathe, while simultaneously draining their life force through their breath. Blood drinking appeared more prominently in Slavic Mora accounts than Germanic traditions. The Mora would sometimes bite the chest or throat of her victims, leaving small marks that resembled insect bites but never fully healed. She particularly targeted the soft spot between the collarbones, where medieval Slavs believed the soul resided in the body. These attacks differed from vampire assaults because the Mora drank life essence rather than physical blood, though the distinction often blurred in folklore. The connection between Moras and vampires in South Slavic folklore created unique regional variations. In Serbian tradition, a Mora who died without having her curse lifted would rise from the grave as a vampire, continuing her torment beyond death. Bulgarian folklore spoke of the Vorkalak, a creature that was simultaneously Mora by night and potential vampire after death. This dual threat meant that suspected Moras faced persecution in life and special burial rites after death to prevent their return. Polish medieval chronicles documented numerous Mora cases with disturbing detail. A manuscript from Krakow dated 1492 describes the trial of Katarzyna Warznik. Multiple villagers testified that after arguing with Katarzyna during market day, they experienced night attacks where they saw her face hovering above them. The victims claimed they could smell her distinctive perfume of lavender and herbs, even though Katarzyna's body remained in her own bed across the village. The Ukrainian variation called Nichnitsia, or night woman, showed unique characteristics. She specifically targeted infants and young children, causing them to cry inconsolably through the night. Parents would find their children with tangled hair and scratches that appeared during sleep, despite closed windows and locked doors. The Nichnitsia was said to be jealous of maternal love, attacking babies whose mothers showed them too much affection. Russian folklore, while having different primary nightmare demons, preserved Mora beliefs in certain regions, especially near Polish and Ukrainian borders. The domovoi and kikimora served similar functions in Russian tradition, but true Mora accounts appear in Western Russian chronicles. These texts describe the Mara as a foreign demon that crossed borders, bringing Polish or Lithuanian curses into Russian villages. Czech and Slovak traditions added unique elements to Mora mythology. The Czech Mura could transform into a strand of hair that would slip through keyholes. Once inside, she would reassemble into her demon form to attack sleepers. Slovak folklore claimed the Mora left wet footprints that could never dry, marking her path through victims' homes. These footprints would remain visible until a priest blessed the house or specific counter magic was performed. The sexual aspects of Mora attacks appeared less frequently than with the German Alp, but still existed in certain regional traditions. Polish accounts describe the Mora causing erotic dreams that left victims exhausted and unable to perform marital duties. Young men claimed the Mora would appear as a beautiful woman who seduced them in dreams so vivid they believed them real until waking paralyzed and alone. Historical church records reveal how seriously religious authorities took Mora accusations. A letter from the Bishop of Krakow in 1523 instructs priests on how to counsel parishioners who claimed Mora attacks. The bishop acknowledged the reality of these demons while warning against false accusations motivated by village feuds or jealousy. He provided specific prayers and rituals for protection, showing how the church incorporated folk beliefs into Christian practice. The Mora played a significant role in Slavic witch trials, though less prominently than in Germanic regions. Polish court records from the 16th century show that Mora accusations often accompanied other charges of witchcraft and maleficium. Women accused of being Moras faced torture to extract confessions about how they learned to separate soul from body. These confessions typically implicated other women, creating chains of accusations that could destroy entire communities. A particularly detailed account comes from the Serbian town of Novi Sad in 1684. A woman named Milica Stojanovic was accused of being a Mora after several prominent townspeople reported nocturnal attacks. The trial records describe how she was tested by being prevented from sleeping for 3 consecutive nights, while guards watched for her soul's escape. When no soul emerged and the attacks continued, it was taken as proof that multiple Moras plagued the town. Slovenian folklore preserved ancient protective rituals against the Mora in remarkable detail. Villages would conduct ceremonies on specific nights when Mora attacks were most likely, particularly during the 12 days between Christmas and Epiphany. Young men would patrol the streets, making loud noises with bells and drums to prevent Moras from leaving their bodies or entering homes. These traditions continued in rural Slovenia well into the 20th century. The Mora appeared in numerous Slavic folk tales that served both to entertain and educate. One Polish tale tells of a young man who married a beautiful woman, not knowing she was cursed to be a Mora. He discovered her nature when he pretended to sleep and watched her soul leave her body as a white moth to torment neighbors. Through love and Christian faith, he broke her curse, transforming a horror story into a redemption narrative. Bulgarian folklore connected the Mora to specific locations that attracted these demons. Crossroads, mills, and bridges were considered gathering places for Moras, where they would meet to plan their nocturnal attacks. Travelers who had to pass these locations at night carried specific amulets and recited protective charms to avoid becoming targets. Some regions built small shrines at crossroads specifically to ward off Moras and other night demons that congregated there. The persistence of Mora beliefs across centuries of Christianization reveals their deep cultural importance. Even as Slavic peoples converted to Christianity, they maintained these beliefs, simply incorporating them into a Christian framework. The Mora became a demon sent by the devil or a curse from God, rather than a pagan spirit, but her essential nature remained unchanged. This syncretism allowed ancient fears to survive in new religious contexts. Medieval Europeans developed an extensive arsenal of defenses against Mare, Alp, and Mora. These protective measures ranged from simple household items to elaborate rituals, reflecting centuries of accumulated wisdom about defeating nightmare demons. The remarkable similarity of these methods across different cultures suggests either shared origins or universal human responses to nocturnal terror. The most universal protection across all cultures involved sharp iron objects. A pair of open scissors placed under the pillow or hung above the bed would cut the demon as it tried to approach the sleeper. The iron itself was considered anathema to supernatural beings, while the sharp edges created a spiritual barrier they could not cross. Blacksmiths who worked with iron daily were believed to be naturally protected from nightmare demons due to iron particles embedded in their skin. Knives served a similar purpose, but required specific placement to be effective. Germanic tradition demanded the knife be stuck into the headboard, pointing upward, creating a spiritual spike that would impale descending demons. Slavic practice preferred placing the knife under the mattress with the blade, facing the door through which the Mora might enter. Some regions insisted the knife must be stolen rather than purchased, as the act of theft somehow enhanced its protective power. The horseshoe represented another universal iron protection found across European cultures. Hung above the bedroom door with points facing upward, it would trap nightmare demons, who tried to count all the nail holes until dawn arrived. The horseshoe had to be found rather than purchased, and ideally should have been cast from a gray mare to protect against the mare demon. Some traditions required the horseshoe be hung on Christmas Eve to maintain its power throughout the coming year. Brooms and brushes provided protection through a different mechanism entirely. Placed beside the bed or across the threshold, a broom would compel the demon to count every straw or bristle before entering. Since nightmare demons could only operate during darkness, they would spend all night counting and flee at first light. The broom had to be made of specific materials, with birch being most effective, against the mare and willow preferred for stopping the Mora. Seeds and grains scattered around the bed created similar counting compulsions. Poppy seeds were universally recognized as effective against all three demon types. The tiny black seeds had to be counted one by one, and their sleep-inducing properties were thought to weaken the demons. Mustard seeds worked particularly well against the Alp, while millet was the preferred defense against the Slavic Mora. Salt formed protective barriers that no nightmare demon could cross according to folklore. Lines of salt across windowsills and doorways created impenetrable spiritual walls. A circle of salt around the bed provided complete protection, though the sleeper must not break the circle during the night. Some traditions required the salt be blessed by a priest, while others insisted sea salt was naturally more powerful than mined salt. Mirrors served a dual purpose in protection against nightmare demons. Placed facing the bed, a mirror would reflect the demon's evil back upon itself, causing it to flee in terror from its own image. Additionally, demons entering through mirrors would become trapped, unable to find their way back to the spirit realm. The mirror had to be covered during thunderstorms, however, as lightning could shatter the spiritual barrier it created. Religious symbols provided expected protection, but with specific requirements for effectiveness. A cross had to be made of certain woods, with rowan being most powerful, against the mare and oak, preferred for stopping the Alp. The cross required regular blessing and could lose power if touched by someone harboring evil thoughts or intentions. Slavic tradition added the requirement that crosses be painted with tar on certain doors to specifically ward off the Mora. Holy water sprinkled around the room created consecrated space demons could not enter. The water had to be renewed regularly as its power diminished over time. Some traditions required adding 3 pinches of salt to holy water, combining Christian and pre-Christian protective elements. The water should be sprinkled while reciting specific prayers. That varied by region, but always invoked divine protection. Specific plants and herbs offered natural protection against nightmare demons. St. John's wort hung above the bed was universally recognized as effective. The plant had to be gathered on St. John's Eve and dried in darkness to maintain its protective properties throughout the year. Garlic, despite its association with vampires, also protected against the Mare and Mora, though less effectively than other herbs. Rowan branches possessed particularly strong power against all nightmare demons. A rowan cross bound with red thread and hung above the bed provided year-round protection if properly prepared. The branches had to be cut with a single stroke using a blade that had never drawn blood, or the protection would fail. Some traditions required the rowan be gathered without speaking, from first sight of the tree until returning home. Stones with natural holes called hagstones or witch stones offered unique protection. These stones, found in riverbeds or on beaches, could capture nightmare demons who became fascinated by the hole and forgot their evil purpose. Looking through the hole was said to reveal the true form of any demon attempting to hide in the room. The stone had to be naturally holed as drilling would destroy its protective power according to most traditions. Clothing and shoes arranged specifically could confuse and repel nightmare demons. Shoes placed, pointing away from the bed, with the left and right reversed, would cause the demon to flee in the wrong direction. A man's shirt draped over the footboard would make the mare believe a man was watching and cause her to retreat. Stockings turned inside out and placed under the pillow created a spiritual maze the demon could not navigate. Germanic traditions included unique methods for capturing and controlling the Alp. If one could grab the Alp's thumb during an attack and hold tight, the demon must reveal its human identity and promise never to return. Plugging every hole in the room, including keyholes with wax or cloth, would trap the Alp inside where it could be confronted at dawn. Stealing the tarn cap while the Alp was attacking would strip its powers and force it to serve whoever possessed the cap. Slavic methods for defeating the Mora focused on finding her physical body. Since the Mora's soul left her sleeping form, tracking the demon back to its source could reveal the human identity. Once found, the sleeping body should be turned around, so the feet faced the headboard, disrupting the soul's ability to return. Some traditions recommended placing thorns in the Mora's shoes, so she would injure herself when her soul returned to her body. Written charms and symbols provided portable protection against nightmare demons. The Sator square, a palindrome reading the same in 4 directions, was carved on amulets worn to bed for protection. Germanic regions favored the Drudenfuss pentagram, especially in Switzerland and Austria. Slavic peoples wrote specific prayers on paper that was then sewn into pillows or placed under mattresses for permanent protection. Specific verbal formulas and incantations could drive away approaching demons. A German charm commanded the Alp to come tomorrow and borrow something, knowing the demon could never arrive during daylight. Polish formulas ordered the Mora to count all the stars in the sky or grains of sand on all beaches before returning. These verbal defenses had to be memorized perfectly, as reading them during an attack was impossible due to paralysis. Sound and noise provided effective protection against nightmare demons in many traditions. Bells, especially those blessed in churches, would drive away approaching demons. Roosters kept in bedrooms would crow at the demon's presence, frightening it away before it could attack. Some regions hung wind chimes or rattles that would sound if a demon tried to enter through windows or doors. Dietary restrictions and preparations could prevent nightmare demon attacks. Eating beans or broad beans before bed was universally forbidden, as they attracted the Mare and Mora to feed. Conversely, eating bread with caraway seeds provided internal protection that demons could sense and avoid. Drinking wine mixed with crushed pearls, though expensive, guaranteed protection for wealthy believers who could afford it. The Mare Alp and Mora represent three faces of a terror that transcended all boundaries of language, culture, and geography in medieval Europe. From Icelandic fjords to Balkan mountains, from Irish cottages to Russian villages, people experienced the same horrifying nocturnal paralysis and created remarkably similar explanations. The crushing weight on the chest, the inability to move or scream, the malevolent presence in the darkness all appeared in every European culture. Modern medicine has given this experience a clinical name, sleep paralysis, and explains it through the mechanics of REM sleep and temporary muscle atonia. Scientists tell us that the brain sometimes wakes before the body, creating a terrifying state of conscious paralysis. The hallucinations are merely the mind trying to make sense of this unusual state by projecting threats into the environment. But this scientific explanation, though accurate, fails to capture the existential terror our ancestors faced. For medieval Europeans, these demons were not hallucinations, but real entities with names, histories, and methods that could be understood and fought. Giving the terror a name and form transformed helpless victims into warriors who could defend themselves with iron and salt. The elaborate defensive rituals provided a sense of control over an experience that otherwise left people completely powerless. Perhaps our ancestors possessed a different kind of wisdom in personifying this universal human experience. They understood that naming a fear gives us power over it, even if the name is Mare, Alp, or Mora. They knew that shared terror becomes bearable when communities develop collective responses and mutual support systems. Every protective charm and ritual represented accumulated generations of human beings refusing to surrender to the darkness without a fight. The universality of these nightmare demons across unconnected cultures raises profound questions about human consciousness and experience. Why did every European culture independently develop such similar explanations for sleep paralysis, with female demons who ride or crush victims. What does it mean that humans separated by vast distances and language barriers created nearly identical protective rituals involving iron seeds and reversed shoes? These demons also served important social and psychological functions beyond explaining sleep paralysis. They provided acceptable explanations for sexual dreams and nocturnal emissions in cultures where such topics were otherwise forbidden. They offered communities a way to externalize and manage conflicts that might otherwise tear villages apart. When someone could be identified as an involuntary Mora rather than an evil witch, it allowed for healing rather than execution. As we lie in our modern beds protected by electric lights and rational thought, we might feel superior to our ancestors who feared the Mare. Yet, when sleep paralysis strikes and we find ourselves frozen in darkness, with invisible weight crushing our chest, we experience the exact same terror. In that moment of primal fear, the centuries collapse, and we understand why humans have always given names to the nightmares that ride us. Perhaps knowing the enemy's face, even if that face is imaginary, remains easier than confronting the nameless dark alone.